Hello, Joerg here from the COACHpreneur Journey podcast. Today I am with somebody who works with coaches building their coaching practice, Ellie Scarf. But before we start, the COACHpreneur Journey is all about the coaching ecosystem, about coaching, about different coach profiles, about providers who support coaches, and the client side. Today, as I said, with Ellie Scarf from Australia. She is helping coaches to build their coaching practice. But rather than me introducing you, Ellie, I hand over to you.
Brilliant.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Joerg, and thank you for having me on the podcast. It is a delight to be here. So, as you mentioned, I call myself a coach and mentor to executive and leadership coaches, but really it comes from a long journey. I started my career as a lawyer before moving into learning and development, but really finding my place as an executive and leadership coach. I have been an executive leadership coach for about 20 years now, and over that time have worked as an associate coach, as an in-house coach, running my own practices, and I'm very fortunate now to be in the position where I get to support other coaches in this space as they are growing their businesses with more corporate clients specifically. So very lucky. I live in Australia, Western Australia specifically, where it is currently very cold. But I have the privilege of having my Schnauzer, my little dog here, who likes to keep my feet warm if he possibly can. But I do tend to move him away when we're recording.
Yeah, I can send you some heat over.
Yes, please.
It's always nice when you have the cold, because then at least in Bali, it's not so hot. But I'm based in Jakarta, right? So I don't get the cold breeze from Australia. Interesting. You mentioned 20 years in executive coaching. So that has been ICF related, coach, because then you would have been one of the earlier coaches.
Yeah. So interesting. My coach training was actually at the University of Sydney in one of the very first coaching psychology units in the world. And at that time, ICF was a bit of a growing organization. And I don't think they had quite figured out their place in their coaching ecosystem yet. And so they had a view that the university training schools were competitive. So there was no recognition of the training that we did at the university level. So in fact, I have never been ICF certified. What I have done, though, in the last 5 to 10 years is been a member of the ICF and have run lots of workshops for ICF chapters. So I feel very ICF aligned. I've always abided by the ICF Code of Ethics, has been something that I've always explicitly called out, but have not been an ICF member certified myself.
Okay. Yeah. So meaning that's not a problem.
No.
Unless it becomes a problem. So just let me explain, right? So it's not a problem because I think there are a lot of coaches out there who are really doing a good job and know what coaching is, and also abide to a certain standard of or code of ethics, right? And I find that is an important distinction, because everybody, as we know, can call him or herself a coach. And sometimes I feel that's a problem, because people get all sorts of ideas what coaches are or what coaching is. And it's not so much about which coaching body is credentialing you, but it's know where the boundaries are, what you do as a coach, to also be clear about it, what you are doing when you leave the coaching domain. And I think the code of ethics is really important. And recently I have made some comments on LinkedIn on some posts where I found that's actually already borderline or right outside of it. And I feel that's not necessarily helping coaches. But I'm digressing.
Can I make a comment a little bit about the ICF? So one of the things I think about, whether it's ICF credentials or whether Association for Coaching, EMCC, I'm agnostic about which of those it is. I think that there's one part of it, which is how does it play out in marketing your business, right? Do we need it? And that's a question I get consistently from my client. Do I need an ACC? Do I need a PCC? What do I need in order to be able to market my business? My advice on that has changed. I think back in my day, which dates me a little bit, but back in my day, it was less known. So it was more about, could you show that you had the skills that were required? I think now there are different landscapes where having that credential is a lot more important. Certainly, if you want to work with any of the coaching platforms, they're requiring you to have the ACC or PCC even. When you're marketing yourself, you've got to build credibility, right? And I think we can build credibility on one of two levers. I think of it as a seesaw. Early on, we're building it based on our professional background. And as we get more experience, our coaching credibility itself holds the weight of our credibility building. In those early days, I think having the ACC or PCC alongside your professional background can be very helpful to get you in the door. And I think it is going to be almost more of a hygiene factor for coaches moving forwards than it has been historically, is my take, really, from that marketing perspective.
Yeah, I can relate to this because we are going to talk about how to build a coaching practice. But I think fundamentally, coaching for many coaches is a referral business, right? So as you put it, the more you are known, the more you have your coach identity and brand and a reputation, the more natural business or clients come to you versus then maybe distinguishing yourself, starting fresh,
Yeah.
and how to position yourself. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I find a lot of coaches, the referral business works in two parts of your career. The very early clients that you bring in from the warmest people in your network. And later on, when you have got those clients built up, I think the interesting gap for me is what about in the middle? Like, how do we actually consistently bring clients in when we don't have the runs on the board with actual corporate paying clients? And we've run out of those first word of mouth referral clients. I love to play in that space.
Yeah, interesting. You just hinted on it, the corporate clients. So you are focusing predominantly on coaches who want to work with corporate clients.
Yeah, I do. And when I say corporate, I probably mean organizational. So that means clients that could be government, could be corporate, could be not for profit or for purpose. So more in that organizational bent. And my rationale for that in the leadership and executive coaching space is that if we look at the budget that exists in the world for all spend on leadership and executive coaching, I would have to say 90 to 95% of that sits within organizations. But what a lot of coaches starting out think is that it's going to be easier to market to individual leaders, right? They think that is an easier way of gaining clients consistently. It feels a little bit less threatening to market to individuals than it does to market to organizations. But in fact, what happens is that there's just a pool of more coaches competing for a much smaller piece of the pie of all of the budget that's out there. So very much I'm working with my clients to say, how do we tap into that bigger piece of the budget in this very specific area?
Interesting that you say that there is a budget for executive coaching in organizations because I hardly see that. So what I see, there is budgets for leadership development, but it's predominantly related to training and workshops and maybe retreats.
Okay.
And at least that's my experience so far, that many organizations, they understand training very well. They understand the purpose of retreats very well. Even I challenge that what they are doing in retreats is not necessarily sustainable because it's often just one-offs or the one thing or two things you do per year. There is budget. So how do you position yourself as well as your client coaches to shift the perspective the corporations have or organizations have traditionally on leadership development towards coaching?
Great question. And I see what you're saying. Certainly my career and the businesses I've grown have been all about coaching in organizations, and really there's a growing sophistication. I think it's very market specific as well. So some markets are much more sophisticated than others. But in terms of how you position it, I think whatever we're selling, right? And we've all got a suite of offers that we have to sell. And it might be leadership development programs, which are more in that training space. It might be retreats. It might be team development, team coaching, you name it, right? We've all got all sorts of things, and coaching, of course. But I think it's a mistake to lead with the offer. What we have to lead with is what is the problem that the organization is grappling with, and getting really clear on that, and usually through very good sales conversations, right? So being able to have those conversations, we want to be positioning ourselves as the thought partner of that person who owns the problem. And when we are able to do that, then we are able to recommend the solution that is best suited to fit their problems. And it may be that your first introduction in an organization is not coaching, right? So maybe it is to run a training program to help them understand what it is they do and how you work, and then it expands into coaching over time. But what I observe a lot of coaches do is go in and say, hey, do you want coaching? And organizations are like, no, what do you mean? We don't need that. We need a training course for our leaders. Absolutely. But if we're in there and we're talking to them about what are you actually seeing, what are the challenges your leaders are facing, and how is that rolling up to an organizational imperative, then it is a little easier to say, actually, what we know from best practice, from research, from various data, from experience I've got with other organizations in your sector, is that, in fact, if you are missing coaching, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And that tends to be a more fruitful way of approaching it.
You mentioned the person who is facing the problems. So that's in most cases not HR. Yet when it comes to talking about these programs, often we are introduced to, or the entrance door is via HR. So what's your take on that?
I love it. You're giving me the juicy questions earlier, Joerg. I like it. I've found in my experience that selling coaching into organizations is about 50-50, whether it is the organizational leader of a functional area or the HR L&D team. But when I talk about owning the problem, in many ways, HR do own that problem because they have been delegated responsibility from a functional part of the business to be able to solve the problem that they have. And so their problem may be that their problem is the political problem, that I have to make this other part of my organization trust that HR and L&D can do their job. Or it might be the strategic problem that the organization needs to differentiate themselves in a particular way by solving this problem, or having leaders that are more change agile so they can meet the need that the market is presenting them with. So yeah, I think it is both. And I think your sales skills need to be able to adapt to whoever you're talking to. And in the best case scenario is that you get to meet both during the conversation, right? Because we want the people who are feeling the pain and we want the people who are helping to solve the problem, whichever dynamic that is. And sometimes we don't talk to HR at all, right? Sometimes it's purely a functional head. And I've worked a lot with law firms and in-house legal teams in my coaching business. And often I'll be talking to a partner who leads a practice group and I never speak to HR. But in other law firms, it's all run by HR, right? And they come to me with a very specific brief. So yeah, it's really variable.
And what are the organizations then looking for predominantly when it comes to coaching? How does a coaching journey or coaching offer looks like in your experience?
Yeah. So I guess an offer is one thing. So the coaching offer is one thing. And then what the organization is looking for is a little bit different. My take on coaching offers, particularly in this space, is that we need to have something called, I call it this, no one else in the world calls it this, a pick and mix. And in Australia, what a pick and mix is, when you were, I don't know, if anyone was young like me in the 80s or 70s or 80s, and you'd go to the corner store and they would have lots of lollies available and you could choose one or two of each of the lollies and exactly what you wanted. And it cost you in Australia like 1 or 2 cents for each lolly. And so it was very variable, but it felt so customized, right? It felt perfect because you could have whatever you want. But in fact, there was a limited selection that we're choosing from. So I relate that to coaching offers, that I think there are certain things in our coaching offers that are standard, that are wanted by all organizations. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that we pull in a very bespoke way. So our coaching offers need to be that right blend of standardized with customization depending on the need of the organization. And the sorts of things we might customize are the use of alignment sessions, the use of various assessment tools, the use of stakeholder feedback tools, the ability to access the coach outside of the engagement, for example, outside of the coaching session, those sorts of things. So I think the offer needs to respond to the problem. And I think as coaches, one of the things that is very effective as a sales tool is our ability to recognize what they need and provide them that, and be seen not to be necessarily selling them things they don't need. For example, like I might have someone and they've done 20 psychometrics in the last 5 years. I don't need to sell them another one, right? We can use what they've got. Or they might be like a partner in a law firm. They don't need alignment sessions because the managing partner would like to have have a conversation, but probably it doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's how I think about coaching offers in particular.
So you shared the customization aspect.
The standard elements are really, we're going to have coaching sessions, right? And the coaching sessions will look, again, the ability within that. So there's duration, there's session lengths, there's the cadence of the sessions, and that can vary. There's, do we put more time up front and then it becomes further spaced out with time? The way I like to do it is always to include a certain number of hours that we can be flexible with our deployment. A lot of people now are talking about, they take this idea of value-based pricing, which I like, which really means let's not talk about the cost per hour in our proposals. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But there's others who are like, no, don't charge by how much coaching you're going to do, charge by the outcome. And in my experience, that is very difficult for organizations to buy. They actually need to know, what do we get for what we're investing? And if, for example, a team goes through proposal, has to sign off on a budget, they're going to be like, that's great, you're going to do whatever it takes. But actually, how many coaching sessions will be involved? So I think we need to be quite specific about that. And then we would include, as a matter of course, like a reference to the preparation that we do outside of coaching sessions. I think it's really important that is recognized. So that might be the research, the review of feedback, speaking with stakeholders during the briefing phase, things like that. I always include a reference to evaluation and reporting. I think that we need to have an agreement on what that looks like. And sometimes clients will just want to check in, right? And obviously not on the subject matter of the coaching, but on progress and engagement in the coaching. And then there might be my other standard inclusions, or I always include reference to the fact that all my coaches go through coaching supervision. So there's a quality process there. And yeah, those are the sorts of things. And of course, fees. We want to be very clear about what the professional fees are. We want to have terms and conditions included in an offer. So those are the main ones.
What stick out when you were sharing is supervision as a differentiator. I'm under supervision. I find it really important as a coach to have that. Mentoring as well as supervision, but I see that many coaches don't go for that. So you recommend that for all your client coaches to be under supervision?
Not only do I recommend it, I actually include it in my group coaching program. Not from me. We have an expert supervisor who runs group coaching sessions every month with small groups within our program. And it is consistently one of the things that gets the best feedback, because I think coaches don't get supervision for a few reasons. I think they don't get supervision either because they don't know about it, right? That's one reason. They don't know the value of it, or they're a bit scared of what it might entail, or they're scared of the price, right? And so there are a few reasons, and I wanted to take those off the table, because when you do your first coach training, it's this quite tremendous developmental experience, right? You usually have a transformation on a personal level as well as a professional level. That's what most coaches reflect to me. And after that, it's never quite the same, right? You never get that same hit again. So in my experience, supervision is something that allows you to do that personal work again in a way that is very expansive and very transformational if you're doing it with the right supervisor. Because it can be quite mechanical. It's okay, I need some help working through this particular coaching engagement that I have. Help me think about it differently, or I think I'm bringing in some of my own baggage. How does that play out? But it goes beyond that in really good supervision to actually starting to explore, what are the stories that you are bringing into your coaching? How is that helping? How is it hindering? How do you think about the perspectives you choose to bring into your coaching engagements? And I just think that is quite extraordinary. So above and beyond, I think it is a very important factor for clients to build credibility and build that confidence, because clients will have, no matter how good a coach you are, clients will always have a perception of risk when they engage a coach. And one of those risks that they perceive is, what if it doesn't work, right? What if it doesn't work? What if my coachee, who could be a very senior leader, what if they don't like you, or they don't get on with you, or they don't find you to be a good coach? And anything we can put in place to say, we have a quality management system in place, right? And we don't just say, oh no, it'll be fine. We say it'll be fine, and we do these things to make sure it's fine. that is also very credibility raising. So I think there's a really personal benefit, and there's also a marketing benefit in doing it.
Yeah, I mentioned that I'm under supervision once in a while to clients or potential clients, but I've never looked at it from a sole marketing perspective. It's just, for me, it's professional.
Yeah.
And if I'm a doctor, if I would be a medical professional, I would also go through some training once in a while. So basically the continuous learning.
Yeah. And I would say there are a number of clients you'll pitch to and they'll be like, what's supervision? They don't care. They don't, it doesn't mean anything to them unless you explain it. And I always talk about what it is. But there are a growing number of organizations who have, like, their HR teams are themselves educated coaches, not practicing, but educated as coaches. And they know, right? And so for them to see that, they're like, oh, okay, you are of a degree of professional that I can feel comfortable bringing you in.
Yeah. Yeah, and the aspect you mentioned about self-development, I'm doing supervision once a month. If I'm coaching a lot, maybe even more, but that also helps you to reflect, right? Because we all go through life and it's always in motion. And then having this one moment, okay, now I stop. And even if I'm not prepared, I would say 90% of the times I have a topic on which I want to discuss. But even if I don't have a topic, something comes up, because just taking a pause.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can do individual supervision, which it sounds like you do. We do group supervision, which is also very powerful, particularly for coaches at an earlier stage of their coaching career, because they get to see what is coming up and learn from a whole raft of other coaching experiences that they haven't had yet, particularly the challenging ones. And the more education we can have about how to handle some of those more challenging scenarios, the better. So, yeah.
I'm also a group supervision and individual supervision. It's a mix. Right?
Yeah.
So I think generally the power of group is underestimated or not properly regarded in coaching, group coaching. So, and you talked about budgets at the beginning, right? So the budget is of course limited. And I find that maybe not the top level, but even maybe the top level, but then not within an organization. So meaning, let's say C-suite across organizations. I think group coaching could be really powerful, but I haven't seen that. What I see a lot is that you get an individual coaching on the C-suite side, and then maybe one level down. And then when you come to lower levels, then of course is an aspect of scale and how much budget do you have available. And I always propose group coaching for these levels, because many leaders at this level, they face common issues, right? And they are cross-departmental. And for my take, group coaching then brings this kind of, oh, me too experience, or they too, right? So basically it makes it more understandable that you are not the only person having these challenges, and that you also learn from each other. And more importantly, because you make yourself vulnerable in these group coaching sessions, you get closer, right? And you build friends. And then basically you break the silos, because now you have somebody in a different department, different unit you can go to if there is something.
Yeah, right? Agree. I think group coaching is still kind of underestimated as a process on its own, where I see it a lot off the back of a leadership development program. That's usually where we can get the group sessions up and running, and it does exactly what you've said. And then if we think about the triad of individual coaching, group coaching, team coaching, I'm seeing a lot more organizations specifically asking for team, not necessarily team coaching, but team development, of which team coaching is one of the interventions that you might choose. And in some ways, I'm seeing organizations, perhaps at not the C-suite, but that first line senior exec level, team coaching and team development really taking off in that space. And it's almost an easier sell, because the pain an organization feels around a team that's not working well at a senior level is very easy to see. You can see the flow-on consequences. Sometimes it's harder to articulate the flow-on pain of an individual. So, yeah, I think that's really important.
What just comes to mind is when it comes to team coaching, and especially at executive level, executive teams are different than project teams, right? So because a project team is working together on a daily basis, day in, day out, right? So they're like a team on a football pitch or whatever, right? So they are working together as a team. Whereas the executive team, every executive has their own responsibilities, and then they go and work with their teams. But as executive teams, they have very few touch points, right? So that's where I think the team dynamics are sometimes different, right? Not clearly observable. When you mention just team coaching, what is your experience in this regard? Why is team coaching powerful for an executive team, and what distinguishes from, let's say, team coaching of a project team?
I think that team coaching itself is highly adaptable to the needs of really whatever type of team you're working. But in my experience, we might bring in more team development tools with more functional or operational teams, whereas with an exec team, we might do more of a purist team coaching approach, right? Which is actually letting them own the agenda around what is the importance of them, why do they need to be a team, and what does that look like, and really holding space for that. And the environment where you may have co-coaching, so someone's observing the dynamics and someone's leading, right? So we might be more of a pure team coaching. And that works very well because usually we're brought in because the CEO or the board has observed a challenge, right? No one brings you in if that team is just happily going about their business, right? They bring you in because there's a problem, or there is a challenge on the horizon and there's a doubt that the team has the capability to work as a team to meet it. And so I think that's where I see at that level, I think quite a sophisticated team coaching approach makes sense. Although we also need to be sure that we meet them where they're at. And some teams, even at the most senior executive level, are just not ready for that, right? And so we have to bring in some of the more team development strategies, which are things like let's get alignment around purpose and more of a facilitated process. Let's make sure everyone does a psychometric, get to know yourself. Then we'll talk about what does that mean about how we understand each other and how we work together and agreeing rules of engagement and all of that. And some exec teams need that as well before we can even get into the more sophisticated coaching. But certainly for more functional or operational teams, I do think we must build them up to team coaching, right? That does mean a lot of that work. It's not team building. It is really that team development, but what is our shared purpose? What are we here to do together that we can't do individually? How do we want to work together? How do we know ourselves so that we can know each other and really get together in a more productive ways? Same approaches, but we just apply them differently or in different time frames is my take on that. What's your experience?
Yeah, I can relate to it, but maybe to the audience, what's your definition of team building?
Team building. I think all of those approaches contribute to team building, right? Which team building being a team that communicates better, goes about less unproductive conflict and more ability to work together to achieve their goals. But in fact, what people usually mean, and the reason I bring it out differently is that people usually think of team building as we go on a retreat and we go and do paintball, laser tag,
have some fun,
right? And so that's what people think of. Or like maybe we do a cooking class and then we go and drink somewhere. And I want to separate that out because I think it's got a bit of a bad rap, team building. But in fact, what I talk about as team development is a team building in the pure sense of the word.
Is there any model you use? For me, Lencioni, 5 dysfunctions of a team comes to mind, for example.
I'm pretty flexible. I like to bring in different models depending on the different engagements, but I do find that the Hogan model of teams, of high-performing teams and the roles that we play in teams is very helpful. And I do the Google rework model around the most high-functioning teams and like the elements of what's required, with the top one surprisingly being psychological safety, right? So a lot of what we do is all about how do we create the conditions of psychological safety so that they can go on to do all of the other important things. So I've used a lot of those models and, of course, Lencioni.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. You mentioned also facilitation and then meeting where the team is or where they are. And so especially for retreats, I always bring a facilitator. So you have different roles, different responsibilities, also slightly different approaches, of course, depending on the team. And that's the beauty, right? So because coaching is one modality of many, and each modality has its value and is suitable for certain situations. What I feel is that, maybe I hinted on that before, is that coaching takes a little bit of a backseat in regards to the other modalities because they may be more established and maybe more well-defined or understood. So now, because you are working with coaches to build their coaching practice, and I've stepped off my corporate role 2.5 years back and now building my coaching practice, and I experience all the ups and downs which come with that. What is your take on building a sustainable coaching practice? What is your approach? How is it maybe different to other approaches?
Yeah. So the first thing I say is that my difference is because I'm coming to this work from having done the work, right? I've been there and done that. And a lot of coaches have done it for a year and decided that they can teach everyone how to do it. It is much more complex than a lot of business coaches out there would have you believe. They would have you believe that there are 5 simple steps and you will have like a $1 million business. And the truth is, and it's not great marketing for me to say this for myself, that's just not true, right? It's not true. There is time. It will take you time to do it. So that's the first thing. Then within that, I would say there is that, right? We need to expect that there is some complexity. It needs to be adapted to you. And there are things we know are predictably effective at growing your business. The things that I focus on are how do we build the foundations and how do we get you into action as quickly as possible in that marketing space. And that usually means the foundations are things like getting clear on your ideal clients. And I think one of the differences in what I do versus what a lot of other business coaches do is I don't think with organizational clients that being quite so narrow in our niche works in the same way than it does if you're selling to individuals. So we need to shift our thinking a little bit on ideal clients. We need to get very clear on the offer suite that we have. We sell coaching, but what else do we want to sell? And do those offers interact in a way that is likely to get us embedded into organizations? And part of that is also thinking about pricing, thinking about documentation, all of those things. So we get clear on that. We build some foundational assets, and that's things like your coach bio, your LinkedIn profile, and your website. So we get those foundational things in place. And I want us getting into the doing of your marketing as soon as possible. And I want us to build a system for marketing that means you are not thinking about marketing every minute of every day, which a lot of coaches who are starting out feel like there is just so much to consider. They don't know what works. And so there is a huge amount of emotional and mental labor that happens thinking about marketing. I want us to put in place systems that will allow you to do that. And the sorts of systems we want to have are systems that tap into your existing network, right? Your professional network that help you to consistently be bringing new people into your world and that get you to start real opportunities so that you have a funnel that will predictably lead to clients at the end. And I say funnel and most people go, what do you mean? But just a process where you go from here is a warm connection. And then how do we go from warm connection to having a conversation to sending proposal through to real clients and being realistic about the volume that is required to do that. And the sorts of things I teach, we talk a lot about outreach, we talk a lot about pricing, we talk about how to show up, how to build visibility when most coaches don't feel comfortable with that, right? And selling doesn't come naturally to us as coaches. It's almost contradictory to what we think we need to do. And so what does that mean? How do we make that feel good and feel aligned with who you are professionally and personally?
So do you have any specific examples? Because you mentioned building systems so that your mind is not always on marketing while you're still doing things.
What that looks like in reality, building all those foundational assets. And then there's a few foundations that you need so that you can just start turning the marketing wheel. Those foundations are things like we need to be able to analyze our professional network and know who's in it and have a pipeline of people that we are, a segmented pipeline that we're going to reach out to. So know who we're going to be connected to. And then the things we need to be doing every week are doing something to grow our network of colder leads coming into our orbit, showing up on whether it's LinkedIn or some other format. I'm platform agnostic, but I think LinkedIn for corporate clients is the most popular one, where we're showing how we can solve the problems of our ideal clients. We are doing outreach, so we know who they are. We're reaching out to them. We're reinforcing that with the content that we are writing, and we are just moving through that funnel on a consistent basis. And the target of the system that I teach is, let's try and keep that marketing activity to 5 hours a week. Right? I think that's a very reasonable amount of time. So about an hour a day that you spend on your marketing. Now, there'll be stuff that is outside of that. Like once we start generating opportunity, that doesn't include your sales conversations. It doesn't include responding to emails, but here's the intentional work we need to do. And that's what the week looks like from a marketing.
Yeah, 5 hours per week sounds really reasonable.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that because there is a system, you know what you need to do and you don't get into this rabbit hole, right? Because there's this black hole.
Yes.
So once you start, you can also be all in, but the returns are very...
There are some things that predictably get in the way. So what I teach is really to get you out of these. One is perfectionism, right? Coaches are generally high achievers. And so they sit down to write a post, right? And suddenly it is an hour later and they haven't posted it, and they don't post it because they're waiting for it to be perfect. And I talk about a lot, we've got to aim for B+ work only, right? And I used to say B-, but the real high achievers are like, oh no, I could never. So I say B+ and they can get their head around it. Or another way to think about it is aim for 80% is good enough and getting it out there. So I want you to get at it. We put time boundaries around things. So it's whatever you can write in 15 minutes, that's what you're doing. And getting really almost diligent about that is important.
How is your take on AI in regards of saving time?
I think AI is going nowhere. So I think we need to embrace it, but we need to be really smart about it, and we can't let it replace our voice. That's the main thing, is that I think AI is helpful when it comes to content creation, in being a thought or a writing partner with us. So my way that I use it is that I have a podcast that I record every week, and I give it to AI, and I ask it sometimes to, not always, but anything it writes for me, I want it to use 80% my words. Right. So there's ways of doing it like that is much more like you. And of course, setting up the right, well-trained AI is very different to just posting in a raw Claude window, write me 10 posts, versus something that knows you, that knows your thoughts. I think that is important. But the most important thing is making sure that you are in your content, right? You are present there, because connection is such an important piece of this. And there's no connection when people are like, oh, that's clearly, and I think people are cynical, and sophisticated about it now.
Yeah, authenticity is really an important aspect, because you see so many things where people just turn away from that. So how long are your programs?
Yeah, so people work with me for a year. So 12 months is the program. And in that year, there's a lot that is available. We have a coaching or a masterclass or some sort of opportunity for people to work with us every week. And then we have a whole raft of curriculum and masterclasses, and we do quarterly strategy planning, and we have an incredible community. So yeah, it's a 12-month program. I used to do 6 months, but in my experience, it felt like it didn't feel expansive. People felt like they were rushing. And I was like, actually, I want you to feel like you can really sit into this business and really feel into all of these pieces and let them unfold. And I have seen results. The results really, we see an exponential path. So at the 6-month point, it's just starting. And then because we've got the foundations in place, I wanted to keep people for that part, because after that, the questions become, more, I call them deal clinics, right? So I've got this opportunity. How do I navigate it? How do I price it? How do I follow up if I haven't heard? When do I start to follow up? And I love that work. And I think it makes all of the difference. So yeah, the pathway is pretty predictable over the course of a year. And that's a good time.
Yeah, I can relate to that. The first entrepreneurial course for coaches I did was the weekend, 3 days. And then there was some homework, so to say. That was very intense and mind-boggling. And that was while I still was in my corporate job. just wanted to get ready.
Amazing.
That was too intense. Helpful, but too intense, and then dropped off. Then I took a 1-year program, which was way better. And then finally I did my master on entrepreneurship.
Amazing.
What I've realized with this topic is it never stops, right?
Exactly.
So because it's like a spiral, right? So you start with something, and then at some point you come back to the same place, and then you need to revisit based on your experience, reflect on it, right?
And that's a good sign. So I think people think that if they come back and they say, oh, my offers have changed, or my ideal client is actually not who I initially thought, and they make that somehow be wrong. And I'm like, no, that's a great sign. That means you have expanded, you've learned, you've grown, you've adapted, and there's no getting away from that. If you think you can just decide on month 1 of your entrepreneurial journey what it's going to look like, you've got no idea. It's going to be completely different in 12 months, and then in 5 years you won't recognize it at all. So I think it's a good sign.
Exactly. Yeah. How long does it take to build a sustainable coaching practice?
Oh, this is such a good question. And it depends, Joerg. Of course it depends. It depends on what is the amount of action you're willing to take, right? That is the biggest determiner. However, I think generally to build a sustainable coaching business is a 2-year journey. I think that is pretty standard. What I aim to do in the work that I do is accelerate that. And it's called the Corporate to Coach Accelerator, but I aim to do that in a year to get us to the point where you are predictably able to see client flow and you feel like that there is a very strong pathway coming out. And we do that through advice of someone who has been there and done that, and a lot of tools, right? So templates, tools, structures, advice, and accountability. So we include accountability processes, because a lot of what derails people early in business is actually not what you know about business. It's about whether you're able to manage yourself in an environment that is so different from a corporate environment, because no one's holding you accountable. You don't have KPIs. Hopefully you set some targets for yourself, but many coaches don't. And I think we put those in place. And a lot of people, certainly I know that of myself, is I respond much better to external accountability than I do to my own, which is why I always have a business coach myself. Yeah.
If that would be a degree, I would be a master procrastinator.
Me too. Maybe we should make that degree. Do you know, when I want to make myself feel better, Joerg, I say, I'm not a procrastinator. I'm an incubator, right? During that time, I'm subconsciously processing so that when it is 5 minutes till the deadline, I can produce something very good.
Yeah, procrastination has a highly negative connotation, right? But it is a signal, right? And sometimes it's like that, right? So you're just incubating, and sometimes maybe it's an underlying fear, sometimes it's a shadow or pattern, and it's also something to bring to supervision, right?
People bring that. The sort I see in business is I'm putting off rewriting a page of my website, or I'm putting off mending my LinkedIn profile, or I'm putting off writing content, or I'm putting off sending outreach messages. And all of those things are things that make us feel exposed, right? And that are related to visibility. And so that is almost always attached to fear of what does it mean for me to show up in this way. So yeah, I make a flippant joke about procrastination, but it does give us some very good data about what's going on.
I feel we can continue talking endlessly, but of course, this topic is so broad and deep, and we touched now on the corporate side. So from the client perspective, we touched on a little bit of what brought you there, then your service, how to build a sustainable coaching practice, the challenges which come with that. Is there anything we haven't touched on yet you want to bring?
No, I would just leave people with, there's a few things that will make a difference if you do nothing else. And in my opinion, the things that make a difference if you do nothing else, firstly, it is do your own work about what it means to be a salesperson. And remember that you are no longer just a coach, you're a coach and a business person. And you have to own that identity, or it's going to be very hard. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is outreach. The practical thing you can do that is going to generate business more than anything else is reaching out to the warm people in your network. And I include in that people who you might have worked with 10, 15, 20 years ago. Those are the people that are going to become your clients. And I see it day in and day out when people in my community post in celebrations about the new clients they've got, and they're like, and it was this person I worked with 15 years ago. And so that is consistently, because with those people, you've already got a degree of credibility. You don't have to sell that. And so that is what I would say. Don't forget outreach. Don't forget it's more volume than you think. and do the work around identity.
Powerful. And so difficult.
So difficult,
right?
which is why,
So
which is why I say it, don't I? Oh, easy. Yeah, not easy. Clear, but not easy.
It's also encouraging, right, to see then that if you do that, if you get out of your comfort zone, then you see the results, right? And I'm happy that there are people like you, Ellie, out there who are passionate about making coaches successful, because I strongly believe we need more coaches in the world. And I see so many coaches really struggling with building a sustainable coaching practice and then going back to doing other things which they might even hate. Right?
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here. Are there any resources, books, or things you want to recommend besides your offerings?
Look, I could share endless coaching resources, but I won't. I would just say, yeah, I have a podcast if you want to check that out. It's called The Business of Executive Coaching. I think we're very aligned in terms of the way we think. So yeah, do come over and connect with me on LinkedIn. I do often run free masterclasses on all sorts of things. I'd love to meet any one of your audiences who needs a little bit of support in that regards. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, one of the reason I say the podcast is I've interviewed a lot of the people I look up to as coaches, who a lot of those are academics and researchers as well as practitioners. So there's a lot of great resources in there. People like Louise Kovacs and Sabah Hassani and Pod O'Sullivan. He's coming on next week. So lots of really great folks.
Okay. So people find you on your podcast, on LinkedIn. And then they can explore all your offerings and maybe also reach out to you to ask for resources.
Brilliant. Love to have a chat with anyone. Talking to coaches is my favorite thing, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, it's also easy, right? Because we understand each other and we can go deep. Ellie, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing all your insights, your experience, and bring the positive energy and positive vibes about building sustainable coaching practices.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me, Joerg.
Thank you. Bye-bye.